Hey guys, tonight we're easing into the soft, flickering world of Renaissance bedrooms, where silk sheets hide secrets and family fortunes rise and fall on whether or not a spot appears by sunrise. You're not just slipping under any coverlet tonight, you're gliding into the odd, unsettling world of virginity testing. It's a world full of whispered prayers, suspicious midwives, and more blood-stained linens than a laundry maid would like to admit. You walk slowly through a candlelit hallway lined with embroidered tapestries, each depicting saints or battle scenes, depending on how macho the house wants to feel. Your slippers barely make a sound on the polished stone floor. But the silence? It's heavy. Because someone in the next room is getting married tomorrow, and tonight, the household is preparing the witness linens. In this society, where science is still flirting awkwardly with superstition, virginity isn't just a personal matter, it's the linchpin of alliances. The merchant's daughter is marrying the miller's son? Time to alert the linen cupboard. A duke's heir taking a foreign princess? Better prepare the midwife with good eyesight and a clean conscience. And should the bride fail to perform her biology properly? Well, you better believe there's a legal clause for that. You sit on a cushioned bench while the housekeeper, a woman with more opinions than teeth, folds what looks like a normal white bedsheet with reverence. It's proof, she mutters, when the morning shows red. And just like that, you're dragged into the strange little cult of blood, linen, and awkward expectations. The virginity test isn't a thing you study in school, but here it's central. And the really curious part, everyone pretends it's about honor, but it's really about control. Control of lineage, of land, of power, and yes, of women. This room smells like dried lavender and ironed linen, but underneath it all, there's something sourer, nerves, because nobody really knows if the test will go right, even the brides, especially the brides. Some weep quietly behind curtains, some drink wine in secret, hoping to calm their nerves, or maybe bleed just enough to convince the house. Others hide desperate little tools sewn into sleeves, tiny vials of rooster blood or beet juice ready to stain the sheets should biology fail to cooperate. Tonight, you meet your first bride. Let's call her Lucrezia. She's 17, has cheeks like cherries and a stomach that refuses to settle. Her mother tucks a dried flower under her pillow, murmurs a prayer to St. Agnes, and closes the door softly. The groom? He's across the corridor, already snoring. This isn't his test. He merely has to appear present and vaguely proud at breakfast. His family awaits that proof with something like hunger. A wet stain, a pinkish mark. That's the currency. And tomorrow, examining of both the bride's expression and the bed sheets. With neighbors lurking at the door and household staff whispering in corners, you start to realize the sex is almost secondary. This is performance art. In Eleanor Herman's Sex with Kings, you'd read how royal courts sometimes had actual witnesses. Yes, plural, just to ensure consummation occurred. Peasants copied the aristocracy in form, if not always in personnel. But the stain was sacred. Of course, that puts a lot of pressure on one fragile membrane, the hymen. Renaissance Europeans, with all their curious enthusiasm for things they didn't quite understand, believed this was a reliable indicator. Break it, you get blood. No blood? She's no virgin. Except, the human body is not a theater prop. Historians still argue whether most Renaissance families truly believed this, or whether it was always a bit of social theater. Some scholars suggest people knew it was unreliable, but used it anyway because it offered a neat excuse to accept or reject a woman's story, depending on what best suited the political need of the moment. And then there's the fringe tidbit you overhear from the cook. Certain noble families bred their daughters soft by diet. Lots of fish, minimal horse riding, and no strenuous weaving. Why? Because the belief was that a gentler life preserved the seal. But nothing quite prepares you for the moment the household wakes at dawn. You hear the clatter of pans, the rush of footmen, and somewhere, a gasp of relief. Lucrezia has passed. The maid carries the folded sheet through the hall like a holy relic. A pinkish spot the size of a peach blossom is visible from 20 paces, and no one asks how it got there. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Share where you're listening from and what time it is, because there's always something soothing about knowing someone else out there is drifting off to the same slow stories you are. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You follow the sheet. It's being paraded, not hung out to dry, but to be quietly displayed for the women of the house. In the parlor, between a bowl of quince and a vase of lilies, the proof sits folded on a polished walnut table, as if it were a precious heirloom or the deed to a castle. The older aunts peer at it with narrowed eyes, pretending to discuss embroidery techniques, but clearly taking mental notes. The stain's shape, the color. Was it fresh? Was it too bright? She's modest, one murmurs. Didn't even flinch when the priest blessed the bed last night. That's when you're ushered into another room entirely, a darker one, lit only by the soft glow of tallow candles and the scent of dried sage. Here sits a man who seems half physician, half confessor. He adjusts his robes, licks a quill, and stares at the empty chair across from him. Tonight you meet the man behind the two-finger test. Yes, it's exactly as bad as it sounds. This particular Renaissance virginity check involves a doctor, or more often, a man simply called learned, inserting two fingers into a woman to assess whether her hymen remains intact. The logic is as flawed as it is invasive, and the room is filled with uncomfortable silence. You, ghost-like in your observation, watch as the physician wipes his hands with rose water, as if that somehow makes things better. The girl entering this room is barely 16. Her name is Katerina, and her father insists she be certified as pure before a match is made. Her face is pale. She's clutching a rosary as if it could wrap her in armor. The doctor does his task with the briskness of a man who believes he's doing sacred work. No one asks her if she consents. No one asks if she's comfortable. They only ask for the verdict. She is untouched, he says flatly. Untouched. As if she were a page in a book that no one dared dog-ear. As if her worth was not in her smile, her wit, or her thoughts, but in a membrane whose function even he doesn't fully understand. In The History of Sexuality, Michel Foucault explores how power and sexuality intertwine, not through overt violence alone, but through procedures like these, where knowledge, legitimacy, and bodily invasion pretended to be science, but were actually tools of control. This was not medicine. It was ritualized ownership. In these doctors, many had no training at all. Some had apprenticed under barbers or apothecaries. Others simply inherited the role through family names. Their experience came from examining cattle, or worse, working in bathhouses. There were no credentials, only confidence and clean fingernails. Historians still argue whether these tests were believed by the masses or merely tolerated because they offered legal loopholes. A noble family might reject a bride post-inspection, thus avoiding a politically inconvenient marriage. A merchant might secure more dowry from a rival house, claiming his daughter was certified. It became a negotiation tool wrapped in pseudo-medical jargon. And here's your fringe tidbit. In some parts of Spain, the two-finger test was performed by nuns. Yes, nuns. Under the belief that their spiritual status made them immune to bias. Never mind that many of them had been locked in convents since age 12 and probably understood anatomy about as well as you understand early Renaissance plumbing. Back in the chamber, the doctor closes his notebook with a sigh. She'll make a fine wife, he says, as if commenting on a wine's bouquet. Katerina is led out, her rosary still clutched so tightly it leaves red beads in her palm. You linger in the doorway as another girl enters, and another. These tests weren't one-offs, they were routine, particularly before high-status unions. Kings might have their brides tested multiple times at various stages of negotiation, like livestock being weighed before a sale. In Sex with Kings, Eleanor Herman recounts how Louis XIV demanded multiple certifications before agreeing to marry Marie-Thérèse of Spain. Court gossip swirled. Was she too pale? Had her hips grown too wide too fast? Did she walk like a woman who's known pleasure? It all sounds absurd until you realize these women had no say. Their lives were shaped, reshaped, and often shattered by rumors, or by one man's opinion after 5 minutes in a dark room with his fingers in some very dubious charts. So you stand there, watching this quiet horror masquerade as science, and you start to realize that the fear wasn't just about failing the test. It was about what would happen after. Would her father strike her? Would her dowry be halved? Would her marriage be canceled or worse, hastily arranged to a man 30 years older just to cover the shame? Would her name become a byword in taverns? A cautionary tale whispered to younger girls while they learned to sew? There are no good outcomes for failure, only quieter corridors, more locked doors. And you continue walking, your steps echoing slightly, past doctors with quills, past mothers wringing their hands, past young women trying not to cry in rooms that smell like rosemary and doubt. You wonder what you'd do in their shoes, whether you'd run, fight, fake it, or fold. Probably some mix of all four. You descend a narrow staircase now, deeper into the house, into a room filled with carved walnut furniture and the faint smell of beeswax. Here, no doctors wait, only books, scrolls, and very bad science. This is the realm of myth dressed in Latin. You sit by a fire that crackles quietly, and across from you sits a natural philosopher, not quite a scientist, but a man who dabbles in anatomy, astrology, and whatever ideas he can steal from Galen or invent after 3 goblets of wine. He adjusts his spectacles and rolls out a scroll. On it, a large drawing of a human body. Female. Mysterious. Incorrect. We're about to talk hymens. You're probably hoping for something resembling medical accuracy. Sorry, that's not what you're getting tonight. What you're getting is how Renaissance Europe thought the hymen worked. And oh boy, it is something. The learned belief was that the hymen was a kind of divine seal, a thin film that guarded a woman's chastity like a medieval drawbridge. The moment it was broken, whether by sex, strenuous riding, or aggressive sneezing, virtue was lost, and social capital plummeted. Except the hymen is complicated. Not every woman is born with a prominent one. Not every act breaks it. Some women, through sports or daily activity, might stretch or wear it without any intercourse at all. Others might retain it after sex. And this baffled Renaissance minds to no end. Historians still argue whether anyone in the period really believed in its absolute reliability, or if the myth was simply too convenient to abandon. After all, it served a tidy social function. It gave powerful men a way to quantify something deeply unquantifiable: virtue, obedience, honor. You're shown a shelf of sex manuals. Yes, manuals. Many were printed with woodcut illustrations, often by men who'd never seen a naked woman outside a fever dream. One features a diagram labeled the Veil of Modesty, a poetic term for the hymen, paired with a helpful note: rupture causes blood, unless she is wicked. Charming. Then comes your authentic story for the night, plucked straight from Peter Webb's The Erotic Spirit Through History. A nobleman in Venice, let's call him Marco, marries a girl of stunning beauty. The wedding is lavish: gold-threaded gowns, minstrels, dancers in porcelain masks. That night the couple retires. The morning, no blood. Panic. Marco accuses her of premarital relations. The bride weeps. Her family protests. The midwife swears she checked. A tribunal is held. Yes, a literal council of old men debating whether the lack of stain was a trick, a betrayal, or a divine test. Finally, Marco's aunt, a cunning widow with a very good library, intervenes. She brings a physician who quietly suggests that some women simply don't bleed. The nobleman is humiliated, but the marriage stands, mostly because divorce would have cost him a fortune. One small step for logic. Back in your candlelit corner, you notice something odd. Some of the books are marked with symbols that look more astrological than anatomical. That's no coincidence, because many Renaissance thinkers believed the state of a woman's virginity could be read in her stars. Birth charts were examined to assess passions. A Mars in Scorpio? Likely promiscuous. A Venus in Pisces? Likely untouched, as if celestial bodies were in charge of bedroom ones. Here's your fringe tidbit for this evening. In 16th century Germany, some midwives carried silver rings with them, not for show, but to test the tightness of the vaginal canal. The idea was that if a woman's body allowed the ring to pass, she'd clearly been with someone before. Never mind that muscle tone, stress, and hydration might all play a role. You run your fingers along the spines of the books here. Some are worm-eaten, others lovingly annotated. Many are full of contradictions. One claims virginity makes a woman's breath sweeter. Another says it can be verified by pouring wine on her chest. If she blushes, she's impure. Yet another warns against women who don't bleed on their wedding night unless they're born under Aquarius, in which case, forgiveness is wise. You exhale deeply. These were not tests in the modern sense. They weren't designed to inform. They were designed to confirm what someone wanted to believe. Virgin? Good. Not a virgin? She lied. And the real tragedy? Women couldn't win. If they bled, they were used. If they didn't, they were deceptive. It was less a test of purity than a no-win trap in white linen. Still seated beside the fire, you hear footsteps above. The night continues. Another wedding has occurred. Another couple retreats behind embroidered curtains. Another mother prays for a stain. You take one more look at the absurd scrolls and wonder, how many lives were quietly ruined because someone didn't understand a basic piece of anatomy? Too many. And tomorrow, someone's daughter will be told she's no longer marketable. Not because of her mind, not because of her soul, but because her body didn't behave like a folktale said it should. You wake, well, not really wake, just drift softly onward, into the heart of a Renaissance merchant's home, all walnut paneling and the warm, spiced smell of roasted almonds. It's early morning, but already the house is humming like a well-oiled trade ship, and there's tension in the air. Not quite fear, more like high-stakes accounting with lace trim. Today, a marriage contract is being finalized, and not just any marriage. This is the kind that links two houses, two trade routes, and, if all goes well, two ledgers. You find yourself a seat near the long oaken table, beside the merchant himself. He's a round man with fingers like sausage links and a voice that always seems to be negotiating, even when he's asking for more salt. Across from him sits a representative from the groom's side, a miller with a serious brow and a feather in his cap that seems almost jaunty, which, frankly, feels inappropriate. Between them rests the contract, laid out in ink that smells like iron and anticipation. The terms are simple, if chilling. Land will be exchanged, grain prices will be fixed, a few barrels of wine thrown in as sweetener. And here's the catch. The dowry hinges on one small, inconvenient clause. If the bride is not proven virginal by morning, the dowry shall be halved, and the union may be declared null. In other words, the bedsheet becomes a receipt. You're not surprised. You've seen how the Renaissance treats a woman's body. Not as a private experience, but as a public ledger. If she bleeds, she's valuable. If she doesn't, well, either she's damaged goods, or worse, someone's been dishonest. You float, ghost-like, to another room where a seamstress is sewing something delicate. It's a camise, white with fine red stitching near the thighs, supposedly for decoration, but you know better. She winks at you and says, "Sometimes the eye sees what it's told to see." She has stories, lots of them, about brides who came in crying and left with just enough beet juice tucked into their sleeves to ensure an early retirement for the doubters. Your authentic story tonight comes from 1572 in Siena. A merchant's daughter, Isabella, was engaged to a banker's son. The contract included a clause about visible signs of maidenhead rupture, an alarming phrase by any standard. Isabella, sharp as a tack and deeply uninterested in letting biology dictate her value, pricked her own finger before bed. In the morning, her mother discovered the stain with great dramatic flair. Historians still argue whether the banker's family believed it or chose to. What mattered was appearances. The dowry was paid. The marriage went on. And Isabella lived to retell the tale with laughter in her garden many years later. You return to the dining room, where the men are pouring wine and pretending to discuss shipping routes. In truth, they're waiting for nightfall, waiting for nature or stagecraft to do its job. And the bride, upstairs, pale-faced, silent, measuring the weight of every hour between now and morning. That's when you stumble upon tonight's fringe tidbit. In certain 16th century Polish villages, local elders judged a young woman's virtue by her walk. Yes, her walk. If she moved with stiffness and dignified tightness, she was said to be untouched. If her stride was loose or rhythmic, rumors would begin. More than one bride was forced to carry heavy jugs across a courtyard under watchful eyes, as though gracefulness were some kind of smoking gun. And here's the stranger part. There were men, self-declared experts, who claimed they could hear virginity. They'd claim, straight-faced, that the tone of a woman's laugh, the timbre of her singing voice, could betray experience. You imagine how often a girl must have sat at a feast and carefully choked down her joy, lest it pitch too high and give the game away. Downstairs, the merchant adds a final note to the contract. Something about compensation for emotional distress if the test fails. It's worded elegantly, but the meaning is clear. No stain, no money. You glance at the girl's mother, sitting by the fire. She's not relaxed. She's counting prayers on her rosary with the speed of someone hoping to outpace the laws of biology. Her hands tremble. She's seen this go wrong before. Maybe with a cousin. Maybe with herself. And you? You wander outside where the staff are preparing a small table for the next morning. White linen, fresh bread, a pitcher of milk, and of course, a space cleared for the sheep. In Sex with Kings, Eleanor Herman describes similar scenes in royal households, where kings demanded that servants collect the stained linens, parade them through court, and sometimes even weigh them. The more vivid the mark, the more secure the throne. A stain was more than biology. It was politics, legacy, proof that a dynasty was safe. Here, it's smaller stakes, but the pressure is no less real. Back inside, the bride sits at her vanity. Her hair is down, her dress is pale blue, and beside her lies a small pouch. Rooster blood, perhaps, or powdered cochineal. You don't ask. You just listen as she whispers, "I'll do what I must." Because in a world where blood and coin are nearly the same thing, women learn the currency fast. And you, sleepy traveler, step away from the door just as the candles are blown out. The house falls silent. One night to prove it. One stain to seal it. You're outside the door before dawn breaks. The house is still. The coals in the hearth barely glow, and the stone floors are cool beneath your feet as you drift through. But you're not the only one waiting. There's a figure already awake, the maid. She's young, maybe 15, and she's been trained for this moment more than she's been trained to write. Her job is singular: retrieve the bed linen, examine it, and then, depending on what she finds, either fold it quietly or raise a silent, triumphant alarm. This morning, she chooses the latter. You follow her into the parlor, where the lady of the house is already arranging a bowl of fruit and pretending not to be nervously pacing. The maid hands over the folded sheet with a small nod. No words are spoken. The woman peeks. There it is, the faintest pink bloom on white linen. You'd think this was evidence of a crime or the first page of a great literary work, the way it's handled. But no, it's just the proof. Proof that the marriage was consummated. Proof that the bride was untouched. Proof that everyone in the house can breathe a little easier. Proof, most of all, that the dowry won't be contested. The sheet is not washed. Not yet. First, it's aired subtly, sometimes even publicly. In some towns, it would be discreetly displayed over a windowsill. In others, particularly among the gentry, it might be shown at breakfast like an awkward centerpiece. You sit at the edge of the room while a few ants pass by the linen, murmuring polite things like, "Well done," and "The Lord preserves the modest." No one mentions the vial of beet juice that might have helped things along, or the quiet pain that might be hiding behind the bride's veil. In Peter Webb's The Erotic Spirit Through History, there's a story of a family in Florence who embroidered a special chest just for the wedding linens. It was said to contain the history of their daughters, which sounds poetic until you realize it's a wooden box full of blood-stained rags. They treated these cloths like relics, not for sentimental reasons, but because they were proof in case of dispute. If a husband ever claimed his wife wasn't a virgin, her family could present the cloth, aged, faded, but still red. Historians still argue whether these rituals were more symbolic than practical. Was the stain truly examined? Was it just for show? Did anyone ever really want to know the truth, or were they just relieved to have a story they could all agree on? You watch now as a priest arrives. He's not here to bless the marriage. That already happened. He's here to bless the bed. This was a custom in some Catholic households, particularly among the upper classes. A short ceremony, candles, holy water, muttered Latin, and a few prayers that future sons would arrive soon, preferably male, healthy, and politically useful. And then the oddest thing happens. The bride emerges, walking slowly, and hands the sheet to the priest herself. He bows, accepts it, and this part you can't quite believe, tucks a corner of it into his satchel. "For the record," he says solemnly. You wonder how many stained linens sit folded inside church cupboards, mistaken for altar cloths. Here's your fringe tidbit for the hour. In certain parts of 16th century France, it was customary to hire professional witnesses, 2 older women who would stand outside the bridal chamber and listen. Not watch. Listen. If they heard the right kinds of sounds, rustling, gasps, thumps, they'd sign a statement the next morning confirming the union. Think Yelp reviews, but for bedroom legitimacy. You leave the parlor and make your way to the kitchen, where the cook is already preparing the morning meal. Eggs, thick slabs of bread, and oddly, pomegranate seeds. For fertility, she says, tossing them into a bowl with a grin. And they hide the taste of awkward silence. You can almost hear the clink of goblets upstairs, where the groom is being congratulated as if he personally ended a war. You know the bride will be gifted jewelry soon, not for love, for confirmation, a kind of thank you for passing her one and only test. In Eleanor Herman's Sex with Kings, there's an account of a young bride in the Spanish court who was gifted a pearl necklace after proving herself on her wedding night. Her new mother-in-law later quipped that the pearls were to replace the one she just lost. The humor was sharp, even then. You wander now into a side corridor where the sheet has been quietly placed on a small altar beneath a window. The sun is just beginning to rise. Light catches the fabric and turns the faint red bloom gold. There's a kind of terrible beauty in it, and an overwhelming sadness, because here it is, the whole of a woman's value, folded and framed in morning light. Not her thoughts, not her kindness, not her laughter, her dreams, or her voice, just a stain. You sit in silence for a while as the house stirs to life. Voices, footsteps, the opening of shutters. The day begins as if nothing strange has occurred. But you know better. And as you leave the house, soft and slow, you feel the weight of that linen trailing behind you, like a question that was never really answered. You step quietly through a narrow alley, past a curtain of ivy and the soft snore of doves roosting under the eaves, until you reach a crooked doorway marked only with a sprig of dried sage tied in red thread. The place doesn't look like much, just another worn house tucked among hundreds in the city's winding lanes. But here lives someone powerful, someone whispered about in kitchens and bridal dressing rooms alike, the midwife. You slip inside. It's warm, herbal, and filled with the kind of clutter that only a person of quiet genius or complete chaos would keep. Carved wooden spoons, glass phials, beeswax candles, a petrified frog, and somewhere beneath the lot, the gentle crackle of a hidden fire. And there she is, bent-backed, sharp-eyed, wearing 3 shawls even in summer. She doesn't flinch when she sees you. She just nods, as if she's been expecting you all along. Tonight, you learn the secrets of the underground network that kept Europe's marriages intact, or at least looking intact. Midwives in Renaissance Europe didn't just deliver babies. They were also chemists, therapists, social engineers, and, occasionally, magicians. And if a virginity test loomed and a bride was afraid, they were the ones called. This midwife, let's call her Marta, has a little black box she keeps under the bed. In it, packets of dried beetroot, stains better than berries, goat's blood sealed in waxed linen, rose oil to relax nerves, and a curious contraption made of rabbit fur and wire. "What's that for?" you whisper. She winks. Not all men know what they're feeling for. She's not joking. Midwives like Marta had techniques, old ones, passed down like family heirlooms. How to produce a modest amount of blood, how to coach a bride on breathing so her pulse stays low, how to place a tiny drop of liquid at just the right moment on the sheet, how to fake tension in the thighs if the 2-finger test came knocking. In The Erotic Spirit Through History, Peter Webb describes a circle of midwives in Milan who trained younger girls in the illusion of innocence. They believed that since society demanded a lie, they may as well teach it artfully. Historians still argue whether these women were protectors or enablers. Were they preserving dignity in a broken system or propping up that very system with clever deceptions? The truth probably lives somewhere in the side between survival and complicity. Marta tells you a story over steaming sage tea. Once she was summoned by a noble family in Florence. The bride, barely 16, had been caught kissing a page boy weeks before her wedding. The scandal was buried, but the fear remained. Marta was asked to guarantee a stain on the linen. No questions, no discussions, just results. She complied, but added her own price: 2 books, 6 bolts of linen, and a promise that the girl would never be left alone with her new husband for the first week, lest injury reveal the ruse. "She's a mother of 5 now," Marta says. He never knew the difference. Your fringe tidbit for this evening? In parts of southern Italy, there were midwives who swore by a specific spell. A Latin incantation murmured over the girl's pelvis while she lay in a hot bath of rosemary, lemon peel, and crushed eggshell. The idea wasn't to purify her, it was to give her courage. When the body is scared, Marta says, it can forget how to bleed. You follow her to the back of the house, where herbs dry from the rafters. She points to a small vine with dark purple berries. Know what that is? You shake your head. Bittersweet nightshade. You don't eat it. You crush it and smear a bit behind the ears. They say it keeps liars honest and husbands sleepy. Marta is full of these phrases. She's also full of grief. Too many girls have come to me crying, she says softly, worried about things they didn't understand, terrified that one mistake or just bad luck would mean ruin. Some weren't even touched, just unlucky in love or in birth, and then her eyes grow fierce. But if they want blood, I'll give them blood. Because here's the thing. For every sheet waved triumphantly at breakfast, there's a woman like Marta in the background holding a threadbare book of recipes and 2 vials of secrets. Not to deceive, but to survive. You sip your tea in silence. You watch the firelight flicker on the wall. You hear the quiet weeping of someone upstairs. Another girl, another night, another plan forming. And for a moment in the stillness, you realize that not all resistance is loud. Sometimes it's stitched into seams, tucked into satchels, or whispered behind sage-scented curtains by women who know the system too well to trust it. As you leave, Marta presses something into your hand. It's a scrap of linen, red thread stitched in a swirling pattern. For luck, she says. You nod. Because here, luck is sometimes the only thing standing between a girl and a future she can survive. You slip through the shadowed arches of the town's legal quarter, just as bells toll softly in the distance. 5 slow chimes echoing through a street that smells faintly of parchment and boiled onions. The courthouse isn't grand, just a stone building tucked between a tanner's shop and a chapel. But today, its worn doors swing open for a spectacle. Not a duel, not a theft, a virginity trial. You pass through its narrow entrance, brushed by the murmurs of a dozen onlookers who, like you, came not for justice, but for drama disguised as due process. The room is humid with breath and whispers. You find a spot along a back bench between a nun with fierce opinions and a butcher who probably just wanted a break from chopping kidneys. At the front of the room stands Bianca, a young woman with tired eyes and hands that won't stop wringing the folds of her apron. She isn't a criminal, not technically, but she has been accused. Her husband of 3 weeks stands nearby, puffed up like a rooster, flanked by his lawyer, a sharp-nosed man with a voice like a dinner bell and the moral compass of a potato. The accusation? Simple. Bianca failed to bleed on her wedding night. And in this world, that's not a biological curiosity. It's a betrayal, a crime, a full-on fraud. You glance at the judge. He's an older man with skin like dried figs and a beard so long it probably has its own opinions. He stares down from his perch like Moses trying to decide whether this warrants thunderbolts or just a strongly worded letter. Bianca's husband makes his case. The bed sheets were clean, untouched, unmarked. No bloom of red to indicate purity. His tone wavers between righteous fury and something more wounded, almost childlike. I was promised a virgin, he says, for the 3rd time. My family paid dearly. I was deceived. His mother, sitting nearby, lets out a performative gasp that makes the butcher beside you roll his eyes. Now Bianca speaks. Her voice is quiet, but steady. I did nothing wrong, she says. I have never known a man before my husband. Not in body, not in thought. Some women simply don't bleed. The lawyer scoffs. Convenient. Then comes the witness parade. First, a chambermaid who swears the linens were inspected. I've seen plenty of bed sheets, she says proudly. This one was too clean. Then a family priest who reluctantly admits that the lack of stain raises concern, if not spiritual questions. Finally, the midwife, who examined Bianca prior to the wedding. Her name is Lita, and she walks with the kind of quiet authority that says she's delivered more babies than the rest of the room has had birthdays. I examined her thoroughly, Lita says. She was intact. My experience speaks. The lawyer counters with medical babble, quoting from a manuscript he probably skimmed at breakfast. Something about tightness, hymenal resistance, and what he calls natural signs of purity. None of it sounds remotely scientific, or ethical, or remotely appropriate to say in public. But here's the trick. No one really cares about facts here. They care about optics, about reputation, about what will people say. You recall a story from Eleanor Herman's Sex with Kings, a Spanish princess once subjected to examination not by one, but 3 male doctors before her wedding to a Habsburg prince. Despite their conclusion that she was pure, the court gossip still whispered she was too confident, too forward. "She doesn't carry herself like a virgin," one lady remarked. That comment caused more trouble than the examination itself. Historians still argue whether virginity trials were ever about the woman at all, or merely a mechanism for men to secure political leverage and financial advantage. After all, if the bride was declared impure, the dowry could be reclaimed. The marriage annulled, the family shamed. It was a win-win for a disappointed husband with a little ambition and no patience. Here's your fringe tidbit. In some regions of Renaissance Bohemia, a failed virginity test could be overridden if the accused woman could name 5 male witnesses to her general modesty. Yes, modesty. They didn't need to have known her intimately, just to say she'd never flirted, never danced too freely, never giggled at suggestive jokes. One town clerk kept a list of these witnesses in a little leather ledger titled Guardians of Virtue. No one knows what happened to it. Back in the courtroom, Bianca's lawyer produces a diagram, clumsy, probably plagiarized from a medical tract written by a man who'd never seen a woman unclothed. He points to it and explains gently that bleeding isn't universal, that hymens vary, that this test is, quite frankly, medically unsound. The judge sighs, loudly. He rubs his temples. He mutters something to his scribe. Then finally he speaks. Marriage is a sacrament, but so too is justice. And the church teaches that truth lies not always in the cloth, but in the heart. A bit poetic, possibly rehearsed. But the verdict stands. Bianca is cleared. Her dowry remains hers. The marriage stands unless her husband seeks annulment through Rome. He does not. Bianca turns slowly, her hands finally still. She walks down the aisle of that crowded room like a queen, without a crown, without a kingdom, but with something almost as good, vindication. You follow her out onto the street, where the light is gentle and gold. The onlookers disperse, already chattering about the next trial. Something about a stolen pig and a runaway apprentice. Typical. Bianca pauses by a flower stall. She buys a single violet, tucks it behind her ear, and continues down the cobbled path without looking back. You breathe in, exhale, and watch the courthouse fade into the distance. One less injustice for now. The road out of town is lined with poplar trees, their leaves whispering in the morning wind like gossiping courtiers. You follow the path north, past vineyards dusted with dew, past the sharp scent of sun-warmed lavender, and toward the shadow of a high stone wall. Not a castle, not a monastery, a palace. You've arrived at the heart of power, and tonight you'll peek behind the velvet curtain of royalty, where the virginity test becomes more than personal. It becomes diplomatic. Inside the palace, the marble gleams, servants whisper in at least 4 languages, and everything smells faintly of clove oil and tension. A royal marriage is on the horizon, and a foreign princess has arrived for inspection, not of her manners, or her education, or her political usefulness. No, of her body. You're led through echoing halls to the royal bedchamber, where 3 ladies in waiting hover near a girl in her late teens, braiding her hair and murmuring encouragement. She's pale, with eyes that never quite focus. Her name is Eleanor, though of course she'll be called something else after the wedding, to fit into the new kingdom. But she must first pass the test. A royal physician is on his way. And unlike Marta the midwife, this one wears rings with death's head seals and refers to women exclusively as specimens. The ladies feign cheerfulness. It's tradition, one says. Happens to all of us. You recognize the tone. Half comfort, half denial. The kind people use when something awful has become normalized. Eleanor is undressed, examined, and declared sufficiently untouched. The phrase is written down in 2 ledgers, one for the palace, one to send to her father's court. That's when you realize this isn't medicine, it's paperwork. In Sex with Kings, Eleanor Herman details a marriage between Anne of Austria and Louis III of France. Before their union, Anne was subject to multiple confirmations of her virginity, not just for court records, but for peace treaties. If she had failed, it might have been seen as an insult to the Spanish crown, and a threat to the fragile alliance between empires. Historians still argue whether these examinations were taken seriously or simply staged to assure nervous courtiers. In many cases, it wasn't the truth that mattered, but the appearance of certainty. Here's your fringe tidbit. In 16th century Poland, royal brides were sometimes examined by a panel of matrons and abbesses, chosen for their piety and discretion. They would examine the girl, then seal their verdict in a wax-covered scroll and deliver it to the archbishop. The seal bore no words, just a tiny engraving of a rosebud. Back in the palace, Eleanor has been redressed. Her ladies gently adjust her sleeves, dust her hair with lavender powder, and rehearse the speech she'll give when presented to the court. "I come with honor and peace," she murmurs, voice trembling. The phrase has been passed down like a family recipe, used by dozens of brides before her. She's not the only one being tested, of course. Her father's honor is at stake. Her entire country's reputation hangs on that single, invisible membrane. And her future husband? He's in the West Wing, playing cards. No one will examine him. You drift through the hallways, past portraits of stern kings and delicate queens, each of whom likely had a story not unlike Eleanor's. Some passed their tests. Others were less fortunate. There's the tale of Princess Margareta of Bohemia, told in hushed tones among courtiers. She arrived for her wedding after a long, rough journey and, exhausted, failed to produce any blood on her wedding night. Her husband, furious, demanded a second examination, this time by a church-appointed physician and 3 abbesses. They confirmed her purity, but the scandal remained. She was eventually sent back across the border. No alliance, no apology. She retired to a convent, died of fever 2 years later. Eleanor thankfully seems luckier. The court accepts her verdict. The announcement is made. The engagement is formalized with a procession, and gifts are exchanged. Lace, pearls, bolts of silk. And somewhere in a locked drawer beneath the king's study, a single folded parchment reads, "Virginity confirmed, no objection to the marriage." Like a customs form for a human being, you follow Eleanor as she's paraded before the court. Musicians play, nobles bow. The prince smiles politely but does not speak to her. They will meet properly later, at a dinner designed to make them look happy and fertile. For now, it's all theater. As she walks, her gaze flickers towards you, briefly. She does not smile, because this test, though passed, has taken something. A little of her peace, a little of herself, not in the way people mean when they say virtue, but in the quiet knowledge that her body is no longer her own. It belongs to diplomacy now. And you, silent observer, turn away as the trumpets sound. You leave the palace behind and head toward the dusk, where the world is quieter and the air less sweet. But you carry with you a folded parchment in your mind, just like the one they placed in the king's drawer. Because in this era, nothing is official until it's been seen, written, and sealed, even if the truth was never part of it. The road north curls through wheat fields and rocky hills, past little shrines to obscure saints and even more obscure noble families, names carved into weathered stone that no one bothers to pronounce correctly anymore. But tonight, your path leads not to forgotten gods, but to the crumbling foundations of Renaissance diplomacy, where treaties were as fragile as egos and virginity tests could spark not scandal, but war. You arrive just outside the gates of a minor duchy, a pocket-sized principality, nestled awkwardly between 2 larger powers, always careful not to step too heavily on anyone's toes. Its leader, the Duchess Adriana, rules with a sharp tongue and an even sharper memory for insults. Her daughter Sabina is about to marry into Bavarian nobility, an alliance meant to secure borders, trade, and political relevance. The match, of course, has been arranged since Sabina was 13. The groom, Leopold, is 19, deeply religious, and unfortunately extraordinarily boring. He once gave a speech about proper spoon usage. Twice. You slip into the great hall on the day of the wedding feast. The air is thick with roasted meat and polite tension. Everyone is pretending they don't know what's really being waited on. Not the wine, not the vows, not the cake with a marzipan swan. No, they're waiting on blood. The morning after, the bedchamber is silent. No linen is produced. A quiet panic sets in. First, the staff are questioned. Was the bed properly made? Were the sheets clean to begin with? Was the chambermaid perhaps mistaken? Then more pointed questions. Was the bride cooperative? Did the groom complete his duty? Did someone tamper with the evidence? But the absence of stain speaks louder than any excuse. Leopold is mortified, his family insulted. His uncle, a Bavarian cardinal with a face like boiled parchment, sends a letter to Duchess Adriana demanding either an explanation or a return of the dowry. He uses phrases like sacred expectation and unfulfilled moral obligations, which, in courtly Latin, are basically fighting words. Duchess Adriana, predictably, does not take this well. She drafts her response while grinding fennel seeds between her fingers and muttering to herself. Her reply is equally dramatic. No dowry shall be returned, as her daughter's honor is without question, and any suggestion otherwise is an offense to the House of Falconieri. Then she adds a very Adriana flourish. My daughter bleeds when she chooses. It does not go over well. By the week's end, troops are being quietly repositioned along the border. Musicians are dismissed early from state dinners. The bishop who performed the wedding goes mysteriously on retreat. And poor Sabina, the girl at the center of it all, is sequestered in a tower chamber with no loot, no books, and a midwife who checks on her every hour as if decency can be coaxed out like a nervous goat. You find yourself in her room now. She's sitting by a narrow window, watching the wind move through the grass. They keep asking me what I felt, she says, not turning to look at you. I don't know what I'm supposed to say. That it hurt? That it didn't? That I didn't enjoy it enough? Too much? They don't want the truth. They want a myth. She sighs and traces a circle in the dust. I told Leopold I'd never been with anyone before. He said he believed me. Then the linen didn't stain, and suddenly I'm a liar. Her voice is soft, but not broken. You drift into the next room where her mother, the Duchess, has convened a war council, composed of priests, scribes, 2 disgruntled historians, and one very tired-looking physician from Bologna. He's been summoned to conduct a second examination. He objects, loudly. Biology is not a moral compass, he says. A hymen is not a signpost. The Duchess offers him a ruby ring. He accepts. And so Sabina is examined again, this time under more formal circumstances, with official observers, signed affidavits, and the uncomfortable presence of a court notary who keeps sneezing from all the lavender stuffed in the room to soothe nerves. The verdict? Inconclusive but not indicative of previous coital experience. In other words, we don't know, but please don't start a war. The findings are sealed in a leather-bound folder and dispatched to Bavaria with a cask of rare wine and an apologetic fruit tart. It works. Barely. The marriage is preserved, the dowry untouched. But the alliance? Cracked, like a goblet used once and returned to the shelf with a hairline fracture. You'd think that would be the end of it, but the whispers follow Sabina everywhere. She becomes that Duchess, the one who didn't bleed, and the one who fooled Bavaria. No one remembers what she studied, mathematics, or that she once translated Virgil in her sleep. In The History of Sexuality, Michel Foucault argues that societies shape their moral codes through such incidents, that bodies are politicized not by decree, but by rumor, ritual, and paperwork. Sabina's ordeal becomes a footnote in a treaty, but a turning point in her life. Historians still argue whether this particular near crisis ever came close to actual conflict. Some say it was bluster. Others claim Adriana kept troops on alert for months. One fringe theory even suggests the Duchess used the incident as leverage to renegotiate grain tariffs. And here's your fringe tidbit. In some parts of Renaissance Hungary, noble families reportedly kept a linen archivist, a servant responsible for storing, cataloging, and, if necessary, retrieving marriage night sheets for legal review. The archivist carried a special iron seal and operated from a room next to the family chapel. Imagine that resume. You leave the duchy under overcast skies. The fields sway quietly. The towers disappear behind you. Sabina, she stays, but not as a victim. She learns to wield her notoriety like a blade, carefully, elegantly. In a few years, she writes a book on courtly ethics under a pseudonym. She raises 3 daughters and teaches them music, debate, and how to spot a fool in brocade. And no one ever asks them for linen. The stone steps creak under your feet as you descend into the physician's chamber, a place that smells more of rosemary and candle soot than it does of medicine. You're deep within the inner courts of a Renaissance city, tucked away from market noise and the clanging of bells, and tonight you'll sit in the flickering gloom of history's most confidently wrong men. Welcome to the workspace of Dr. Vittore Delafonte. He's not just a physician. Oh no, he's an expert in the feminine mysteries as he signs his letters, and by all accounts, he has the bedside manner of a tax inspector and the ego of a duke. You slip into the corner of his study. It's a chaos of open books, poorly labeled jars, discarded bones, and sketches of the female form that look more like squids than people. In one illustration, a uterus resembles a rosebud. In another, a corked bottle. All his diagrams are annotated with long, looping script and the occasional Latin word that sounds impressive, but is mostly decorative. Dr. Vittore has devoted the better part of his life to proving what he already believes, that virginity is a visible, measurable, and diagnostically reliable physical state, one that he and only he is qualified to assess. He sits now at his desk, reading a letter from a nobleman requesting an impartial and discreet verification of his daughter's status. It comes with a pouch of ducats and a bottle of French perfume. Vittore accepts both without blinking. You settle in beside the fireplace, watching as he begins to prepare his tools, a vial of rosewater, a silver probe, far too ornate for its purpose, and a quill already loaded with ink to write down his findings. No patient yet, just the ceremony. In Sex with Kings, Eleanor Herman describes similar figures, men who made careers examining queens and princesses for signs of purity, armed with their own invented checklists and a disturbing amount of confidence. Some were charlatans, some believed their own methods, all operated with impunity. Vittore's methods are at best eccentric. He records the tightness of the vaginal canal, the tone of the skin, even the sound of a girl's breathing. He claims a real virgin will not gasp when examined, only blush modestly. His standards, of course, vary depending on who is paying. Historians still argue whether these kinds of practices were pseudo-scientific performance or genuinely believed attempts at medical discovery. Some scholars point to records of physicians documenting partial ruptures or false hymens, and others claim they were just repeating what older texts told them. Layered misunderstandings passed down like family recipes. And here's your fringe tidbit for the night. Vittore owns a small cabinet filled with preserved anatomical models, crafted from wax, silk, and what he insists is authentic human tissue. One of these models has a hinge. It opens like a locket, revealing what he labels stages of purity. He claims he shows it to university students. No one's ever seen these students. You find his casebook open on the desk. Inside, a recent entry. Subject, Lady Elisabetta, age 17. Presented for examination at request of her uncle, payment in advance. External presentation suitable. Hymenal state ambiguous. Prescribed reduction of emotional stimulus and further observation. You stare at the last line. What does further observation even mean? You flip through earlier entries. Each one reads more like a diary than a diagnosis. Some notes include doodles of lilies or cages. Others include poetic metaphors. Her virtue was like early frost, delicate and easily disturbed. It would be romantic if it weren't so invasive. Tonight's authentic story belongs to one of these entries. A girl named Katerina, daughter of a cloth merchant, examined before her marriage to a much older magistrate. Vittore wrote that her hymen was firm and true, though touched perhaps by equestrian habits. On this recommendation, the marriage went ahead. 6 months later, she was returned, quietly, humiliatingly, after producing no heir and accused of being frigid. Her family blamed Vittore. He blamed her posture. The case was dropped. Katerina was last seen entering a convent near Parma. You leave the desk and pace through the chamber. In one alcove is a locked drawer. You peer through its cracks and see dozens of sealed letters tied with ribbons. You don't open them, but you can guess what they are. Pleas from girls begging for favorable diagnoses. You can almost hear the desperation in the paper. One letter, half tucked out, reads, "Please say I am enough. I will repay you however I can." Vittore has kept them all. Why? Perhaps guilt, perhaps pride, or perhaps, like everything else in this room, they're simply data. He walks back into the study now, carrying a fresh candle and muttering to himself. "They never thank you," he says, not noticing you, even when you save their lives. He places the candle beside his diagrams and sighs, staring at a page titled The Virtuous Seal, Methods of Visual and Tactile Confirmation. He doesn't question the system. He is the system, self-appointed, self-published, and self-certain. You glance one last time at his shelves. Among the nonsense, there are glimmers of something real. Herbs that actually soothe pain, diagrams that almost make sense, but they're buried beneath layers of myth, ego, and the kind of blind certainty that history seems to love in the moment and regret forever after. And you? You slip out the side door and back into the night, thankful your breath isn't recorded, your blush is not judged, and your virtue not charted like a trade route. Because in this world, the truth was never the goal, only the verdict. You leave the noise of the city behind, its clanging bells, bustling stalls, the endless chatter about dowries and blood, and follow a narrow path that winds through the hills like a question left unanswered. The air cools, the soil grows red and rocky. Soon you're walking between rows of olive trees, their silvery leaves rustling like whispered prayers. Up ahead you see it, a stone chapel tucked into the hillside, its roof sagging under ivy and its front door crooked but proud. Welcome to the chapel of St. Agnes of the Lily. You step through the threshold. The temperature drops slightly. The air smells of wax and rosemary. Inside, rows of wooden pews face a modest altar, adorned not with gold, but with linen. Stacked and folded, dozens of cloths sit bundled in satin ribbons, some bright white, others yellow with time. These are not altar cloths. These are wedding night linens, left here, not in reverence, but in hope, or maybe fear. You sit quietly in the back, beside a statue of the saint herself. She's depicted young, veiled, with a palm frond in one hand, and strangely a key in the other. The key to chastity, a woman whispers beside you. St. Agnes protects those who come untouched to their wedding bed, or those who need a little help appearing so. That's when you realize this isn't just a chapel, it's a sanctuary for anxiety. A space where linen is prayed over, blessed, and on occasion, miraculously bloodied. Not by saints, but by subtle hands. In The Erotic Spirit Through History, Peter Webb details how shrines like this sprang up across Europe. Some, like this one, became informal reliquaries for the ritual of virginity. The faithful didn't come for healing. They came for intervention, for subtle miracles, for social insurance. You watch as an elderly woman approaches the altar, unfolds a cloth no bigger than a scarf, and places it down with trembling fingers. She lights a candle, murmurs a prayer, and walks away without looking back. A note left beneath the cloth reads, "She didn't bleed, but she is good. Please let that be enough." Others are less poetic. Let them see what they want to see. Make him believe it was his. Please give her the luck I didn't have. You drift into a side room filled with the scent of lavender and dried herbs. The walls here are covered with wax effigies, not of limbs or saints, but of wombs. You see dozens of them, each a soft symbol of hope, carved by nervous brides or their mothers. Some are smooth and unmarked. Others bear tiny red stitches, tokens of what was lost or feared lost. And here's your fringe tidbit. In 16th century Naples, certain convents offered a quiet service called La Conferma for a donation paid in cheese, coins, or silks. A nun skilled in embroidery would stitch a blessing line into a bridal sheet. It wasn't a forgery exactly, just a suggestion, a red thread placed just so, designed to bloom faintly in candlelight and let the imagination do the rest. Historians still argue whether these practices were driven by compassion or corruption. Was it charity or commerce? Did these places empower women or merely reinforce the demand for deception? You find the priest at the edge of the chapel, quietly rearranging candles. He's a man in his 60s, gentle-eyed, soft-spoken. When you ask about the cloths, he smiles just barely. They're prayers, he says. Each one says something a mouth couldn't risk saying. He tells you about Julia, a girl who came here trembling 2 days before her wedding. She was honest, too honest. She said she'd been in love once before with a stable boy. It hadn't gone far, but she feared the sheet would say otherwise. The priest pauses, selects a small vial from a locked cabinet, and places it on the altar. "We helped," he says simply. "You don't ask what's in the vial. You don't need to. Because in this place, the difference between virtue and shame isn't truth, it's optics." Another candle is lit, another cloth is folded. You walk past the statue again and notice something new. Beneath St. Agnes's feet lies a crushed rose, its petals pressed flat against the stone. Symbol of love or lost innocence? Probably both. Tonight's authentic story comes from a 15th century account in southern France. A young bride named Margot was forced to undergo a virginity examination by a physician hired by her husband's family. She passed, barely. But after a clean wedding night, her new relatives accused her of deceit and demanded proof. Margot's mother brought the linen to this very chapel, laid it on the altar, and claimed a miracle. The priest, new to his post and panicked, publicly declared the cloth sacred. The husband, faced with a divine endorsement, relented. The couple went on to have 6 children. The cloth remains in a box beneath the altar to this day. True? Exaggerated? Invented? Who knows? But here that doesn't matter. You step outside as the moon begins to rise over the olive grove. The leaves whisper again, and somewhere in the dark, a nightbird calls once, low and sweet. You glance back at the chapel, small, crooked, and full of impossible mercy. It's not a solution, but it's something. The sky has darkened into a plum-colored haze. Lanterns are being lit in the winding alleyways below, and you find yourself pulled not toward palaces or chapels this time, but into a different kind of power entirely. You follow the scent of sandalwood and mulled wine toward a courtyard alive with laughter, lilting lute music, and velvet drapes swaying like gossip in the breeze. Tonight you enter the world of the Renaissance courtesan. This isn't a brothel, not exactly. It's something more polished, more deliberate. A salon, a place where conversation holds as much value as touch and where appearance, illusion, is everything. You pass under an arch draped in crimson fabric and into a garden where peacocks nap in the shadows and candles float in shallow bowls of rosewater. Inside, you're greeted by the madam, a woman with sharp eyes, artfully gray-streaked hair, and more rings than fingers. She doesn't ask your name. She just smiles and gestures you in. You're just in time, she says. We're discussing virginity. Again. She says it like one might say, tax season. You're ushered into a room draped in silk and warmed by a dozen low braziers. Cushions line the floor, and women lounge among them, sipping wine, eating figs, and laughing the kind of laugh that comes from both exhaustion and power. They're courtesans, yes, but also actresses, negotiators, survival artists. Tonight, they're trading stories. The theme? How many times each has lost her virginity, professionally? 14, one says, lounging like a queen. 3 in the same week. I deserved a medal. Another raises a finger. I once sold it back to the same client. 3 years apart, he cried both times. The others erupt with laughter. You take a seat beside a woman named Bianca, whose voice is low and deliberate. The first time I faked it, she says, I didn't even know how. I just squeezed my eyes shut, whimpered a little, and said a prayer afterward. It worked. He said I was his angel of untouched delight. She rolls her eyes. I almost laughed, but it paid for my sister's wedding shoes. The conversation turns to blood. Because, of course, no performance is complete without props. Some use pricked fingers, quick, clean, symbolic. Others prepare tiny pouches of sheep's blood, tied into silk sachets and tucked discreetly between the thighs. The more inventive use crushed berries or dyed cotton. One woman, blushing with pride, says she once used a red-dyed wine-soaked sponge. I wrung it out between the sheets when he got up to stoke the fire, she says. He never noticed. Left me a ruby brooch. They all agree. It's not about deception. It's about survival. In Sex with Kings, Eleanor Herman recounts the story of Barbara Palmer, a mistress of Charles II of England, who remarketed herself as virginal every time she acquired a new noble client. She bathed in milk, painted faint veins on her chest, and always wore pale blue, a color symbolically tied to innocence. I've been a virgin more times than I can count, she reportedly said, and I've never had less than a duchess's pension to show for it. Historians still argue whether these rituals of performance were acts of empowerment or submission. Were these women asserting control over the narrative, or simply adapting to survive within it? Perhaps both. Perhaps that contradiction is the point. Tonight's authentic tale comes from the diary of a Florentine spice merchant in 1583. He boasts of paying an enormous sum to be the first with a courtesan named Lucia, who prepared the entire encounter with choreographed modesty. She wore white, braided violets into her hair and placed a tiny ampoule of lamb's blood under the mattress. He describes her cries as poetic. He never knew they were rehearsed. He returned a year later, paid again. Lucia claimed sweetly, I've never known anyone the way I know you. She probably said that to everyone, but it didn't matter. Here's your fringe tidbit. In certain Venetian salons, Courtesans employed prop masters, usually old widows or herbalists, who specialized in illusion assistance. They provided tools like blood packets, pheromone pastes, usually just musky perfume, and powders to cause faint temporary swelling, all to enhance the impression of newness. You listen now as the women reflect on what this performance cost them. It's not the blood, one says softly. It's the pretending, the holding your breath while someone believes they're discovering something sacred. Another nods, and knowing if you don't, you might starve. Still, some embrace it. Viola, the madam, leans in. I tell my girls, sell it once, sell it twice, sell it until they stop asking. She raises her glass, and then teach them how to ask for something else. You walk through the salon one last time before you leave, past the paintings, the faint scent of clove oil and wine, the laughter echoing like wind chimes behind the curtain. This house is a stage, and every sheet a prop. But behind it all, women who've learned to spin gold from threadbare myths, who pass the test night after night, not with their bodies, but with their cunning. And sometimes, that's the only choice they were ever given. The next morning breaks soft and blue, with dew clinging to the stones and pigeons cooing as if nothing in the world has ever gone wrong. You leave the courtesan salon behind, its silks, its laughter, its small revolutions, and follow a quiet path toward the university quarter. Here, in a courtyard lined with crumbling statues and moss-covered benches, a different kind of performance unfolds, one with robes, scrolls, and arguments in Latin. Tonight, you're visiting the scholars. You pass under a stone arch etched with fading script and enter a small auditorium where men with inkwells and large foreheads debate fiercely and sleepily the nature of women, specifically whether they possess desire. You take a seat on the hard bench just as a professor clears his throat and begins. Woman by nature is colder than man. Her blood is slower. Her passions are lesser. A younger scholar interrupts. But why then do some women display appetite? An older man scoffs. Appetite is not desire. It is curiosity. And curiosity is not sin. There is silence, then scribbling. This is how Renaissance universities often explored sexuality, with metaphor, awkward phrasing, and a total absence of actual women. You watch as one speaker gestures toward a chalkboard covered in nonsensical diagrams, ovals labeled feminine essence, squiggly lines labeled humoral tides. The audience nods. Some furrow their brows. One man writes theory of lunar womb tide and underlines it 3 times. You realize something profound. None of them have any idea what they're talking about. And yet their theories shape law, marriage, theology, and medicine. In The History of Sexuality, Michel Foucault describes this process, how academic institutions define sexuality not through observation, but through systems of classification and power. Women's bodies became puzzles, not to understand, but to control. These scholars weren't seeking knowledge. They were building cages. You wander into the library, dark, musty, impossibly quiet. Shelves stretch higher than you can reach. You run your fingers along cracked spines. One book promises to reveal the 7 veils of Eve. Another is titled De Pudore Femini, on female modesty. Inside, you find a chapter listing the signs of virginity. Pale skin, delicate pulse, soft speech, low appetite. If a woman is too animated, suspicious. If she laughs too freely, a red flag. Another chapter advises husbands to test their wives not only physically, but temperamentally. Offer her sweetmeats and observe her reaction. Ask her about love and watch her blush. If she seems too knowledgeable, be wary. It reads less like science and more like horoscope crossed with interrogation. Here's your fringe tidbit. One 16th century academic tract from Padua suggested that virgins could be identified by the scent of their breath when fasting. According to the author, true virgins exhaled a lightness akin to angelic lilies, while non-virgins had a thick odor tinted with worldly experience. No one knows what that means. Probably not even the author. Back in the auditorium, the debate has escalated. One scholar has brought in a jar of menstrual blood, don't ask where he got it, to demonstrate that it darkens upon contact with sin. He pours it onto parchment. Nothing happens. He looks disappointed. Another scholar counters with an allegory about gardens, bees, and locked gates. You suspect he's never been near a garden. The oldest professor stands, clears his throat, and declares, desire in women is natural only within marriage and only when duty calls. Otherwise, it is to be corrected. Everyone nods. The debate ends. No conclusions, just consensus. You exit the building feeling slightly more confused than when you entered. Outside, you find a group of laundresses gossiping beside a fountain. She didn't blush when he complimented her, says one. That's how you know. Another snorts. I didn't blush when my husband complimented me. I just remembered the last time he tracked mud through the hall. They laugh, and you realize, while scholars invent nonsense in Latin, real women already know the truth. Virginity isn't measurable, desire isn't predictable, and nobody blushes on command, not for scholars, not for kings. Tonight's authentic story comes from a preserved university record in Bologna, where a student named Matteo submitted a thesis arguing that female desire was not only real, but more potent than male desire. He cited myth, poetry, and even animal behavior. His professors called it poetic but dangerous. He was not allowed to graduate. He became a playwright instead. Historians still argue whether early modern academia helped evolve understanding or merely froze it in place. These lectures may sound absurd now, but they shaped laws and norms that lingered for centuries. You walk now through the gardens behind the library. The statues of philosophers seem less wise in the moonlight, more confused than noble. A breeze stirs the pages of a forgotten notebook someone left on the bench. Inside, a scribbled line. She said no, but her pulse was quick. Is this consent? You close the book gently and keep walking. Because sometimes the most dangerous myths don't come from churches or royal courts. They come from the people who think they're smarter than everyone else. The sun sinks low again as you descend from the university hills into the amber-lit alleys of a city alive with performance. Not the scholarly kind, nor the theological. This is theater. Red curtains, powdered wigs, painted cheeks. But tonight, the show isn't on a stage. It's behind locked doors, in chambers flickering with lamplight, where the lines between fantasy and commerce blur, and where virginity is not only tested, but sold, over and over again. You've arrived at a house on the corner of a Venetian square. From the outside, it looks like any other merchant's villa, shutters half drawn, ivy creeping over the arch. But inside, the staff bustle with practiced calm, readying for the evening's specialty. La prima volta, the illusion of first time. This is the art of artificial innocence. You're greeted by a woman named Cosima. She is both madam and producer, commanding her performers with the flair of a general. She adjusts a curtain, sprinkles lavender water on the bed linens, and gives a last-minute pep talk to tonight's virgin. The girl, maybe 18, breathes slowly, eyes half closed. You know your lines? Cosima asks. The girl nods. Whimper, pause, tense, but not too much. Another nod. Blood? The girl shows a small sachet sewn into her waistband, thin lamb's blood soaked into muslin, just enough to dab between the thighs and mark the sheets. Perfect, Cosima says. Let's make history. And just like that, another virgin is born. You sit in the hallway with the costumers as they prepare the next performance. Tonight's client is a Genoese merchant who specifically requested a blushing novice. He's paid extra for authenticity. No perfume, he wrote, and eyes that look like they've never lied. The staff chuckle. Oh, they always say that, one whispers. And they never notice the wig. In The Erotic Spirit Through History, Peter Webb describes brothels that offered curated, first-time illusions for elite clientele. These women weren't fools. They were trained performers who knew the emotional cues that mattered. Nervous laughter, trembling limbs, the quiet plea of be gentle. What mattered was not what was real, but what was believable. And here's your authentic story tonight. In 1557, a theater actress in Florence named Lorenza supplemented her income by selling her first time multiple times. She claimed it as a character, the pious merchant's daughter, newly disgraced. Each time, she wore a different accent, different backstory. One patron left her enough money to retire. She later published her own play under a male pseudonym. Historians still argue whether these illusions undermined or empowered women. Some say they reinforced the myth. Others argue they flipped it, weaponized it. After all, if the test can be passed by artifice, doesn't that prove its invalidity? Here's your fringe tidbit. A few Venetian brothels had full-time set designers. Yes, men paid to design bedrooms that mimicked rural cottages or noble boudoirs, depending on the fantasy. One even built a rotating bed with a squeaky headboard to mimic a nervous first encounter. It was reportedly very popular. You return to Kozima's side as she checks on another girl, Chiara, who has performed this role 17 times. Don't you get tired? You ask. Chiara smiles. Of what? Pretending? That's what we all do, isn't it? At least I get paid. She adjusts her camise, brushes a little rouge off her cheek. And no one asks me for the truth anymore. They just want the story. Kazama hands her a small bottle, rose water and a drop of vinegar. It's for the client's pillow. Smells like virtue, she says. You laugh, so does Chiara. Then the bell rings. The merchant has arrived. He's led upstairs, offered wine, and shown the room. You don't follow. You've seen enough. Instead, you sit in the back salon with two older women, retired performers who now train the new girls. They discuss pace like theater coaches. One gasp at the right time, one says, and he'll believe anything. You ask them if they ever told the truth. Once, one replies. He didn't believe me, thought I was playing a different game. They shrug. Truth isn't the currency here. Performance is. As the night deepens, Kozama reviews payments. Everything is recorded. The house takes a cut. The girls get the rest. Bonuses are given for convincing reactions. The most sought-after illusion? A quiet tear. Men love that, Kozima says. It lets them feel like gods. You step outside into the soft dark. Across the square, lovers kiss in shadowed corners. A drunk stumbles over a crate of oranges. A cat watches from a windowsill. You glance back once at the house. Not out of judgment, but awe. Because what they do in there, behind red curtains and lavender sheets, is no less orchestrated than a coronation or a courtroom verdict. It's the same myth, just better lighting. And somehow, it's more honest. Tonight, you follow the scent of smoke. Not from hearth fires or tavern kitchens, but from something far older and darker. The road narrows, the air thickens. You're walking into a space where doubt becomes danger, and womanhood, especially womanhood that doesn't conform, is not merely mistrusted, it's punished. You've reached the edge of a village gripped by fear. A small crowd gathers in the square. They murmur, shift on their feet, glance nervously toward a wooden scaffold being assembled near the old well. No actors take the stage tonight. This is a different kind of performance. In the center, a girl, young, maybe 17, stands with her hands bound in front of her, flanked by two guards. Her name is Benedetta, and according to the charges whispered over root vegetables and church pews, she is a witch. You move closer. The list of accusations is long and vague. Walking alone at night, gathering herbs without permission, humming songs from no known hymnal. But one line stands out in the official statement, read aloud by the magistrate with unnecessary emphasis. No blood was found on the marital linens, and there it is. Not just witchcraft, not just ungodly knowledge, but the oldest accusation of them all. She did not bleed. No stain, no proof, no protection. You feel the crowd stiffen at those words. Some nod solemnly, others cross themselves. A few glance at their daughters, standing nearby. And in their eyes you see it, not certainty, but the terrible, greedy relief that this time it isn't their girl in the middle. You drift through their ranks toward the stone chapel where a panel of 3 priests and a midwife are preparing the next step, a final examination. Benedetta, pale and trembling but defiant, is brought in. She's ordered to strip, to lie on a table, to submit to hands that claim authority but wield only pressure. The midwife says nothing as she completes the exam. When it's over, she nods at the priests. There is no evidence of rupture, she says. And though no one says the word out loud, everyone knows what it means. Unclean, impure, possibly unholy. In Sex with Kings, Eleanor Herman recounts how failed virginity tests were often used as political tools to annul marriages, invalidate alliances, disgrace rival families. But for common women? For girls like Benedetta? These failures were not tactics, they were traps. Historians still argue whether witch trials used virginity status as a formal piece of evidence or just a convenient layer of shame. Some scholars insist the unmarked sheet became shorthand for moral rot. Others believe it was simply a way to layer suspicion onto a woman who already made people uncomfortable. Benedetta? She was an apprentice healer, knew how to read the stars, had a quick tongue and a quiet laugh. None of that helps her now. You sit beside an old woman in the back row of the chapel, clutching a rosary worn smooth from decades of whispered fear. She leans towards you and mutters, "I bled like a river, and they still called me wicked. The stain isn't proof, It's bait. She's right. Here's your fringe tidbit. In 16th century Switzerland, a man named Johann Kehl recorded over 50 virginity trials conducted during witch interrogations. In his notes, he described various tests: walking barefoot across hot stones, a virgin could supposedly pass unharmed; placing garlic under the tongue, impure women would gag; and applying a mixture of sheep's milk and ash to the thighs. If it turned black, the girl was darkened within. None of this had any basis in anatomy. It didn't need to. It was theater. Brutal, deadly theater. And in that theater, blood was either present and therefore corrupted, a sign of lust, demonic appetite, or absent, which proved collusion with Satan, who was believed to seal his servants from bleeding like normal women. You can't win that game, and neither can Benedetta. As you follow her to the scaffold, you pass by a group of scribes documenting everything, lining up parchment, dipping quills, noting the names of those in attendance. History, they think, is being made here. But the only thing being truly recorded is fear. Fear of what women might know, what they might feel, what they might hide or not hide between their thighs. Before the torch is lit, Benedetta speaks. Her voice is low but clear. They looked inside me and saw what they were afraid of. I am not your firewood. She turns her face toward the crowd, toward the priests, toward no one and everyone. I was a girl, and then I was a test, and now you failed me. The wind picks up. The crowd doesn't breathe. And then, smoke, the sound of snapping wood, silence. You step back slowly, smoke stinging your eyes, and you realize something terrible. It wasn't the failure to bleed that doomed her. It was the fact that others couldn't explain it. When people fear what they don't understand, they don't ask questions. They light torches. The road stretches long and flat beneath a pale lavender sky, the kind that makes everything feel suspended in breath, just for a moment. You leave behind the courts and inquisitions, the perfumed salons and crimson sheets. Now, your footsteps soften against dirt paths lined with dry grass and olive trees. The landscape here is quiet. It doesn't speak in proclamations or gossip. It murmurs. You're in the countryside now, far from city gates, where rituals are passed not through decree, but through whispers over lentil stew and hand-stitched embroidery. Your destination, a small stone farmhouse, nestled between a vineyard and a chapel that's seen better days. The chickens scatter as you approach. The dog on the porch raises its head, yawns, and goes back to sleep. Inside, the hearth is warm, the floor swept clean. An older woman with a braid down to her hip stands at the table, preparing something with the seriousness of a surgeon and the tenderness of a grandmother. Her name is Agata, and tonight she's helping her niece Marietta pass a test no one wants to talk about. You're just in time for the lesson, how to stain a wedding sheet. Not because Marietta isn't a virgin, and not because she's ashamed, but because she's uncertain, and uncertainty here is dangerous. Agata unfolds a freshly laundered white linen and lays it flat. Beside it, a small ceramic jar, cool to the touch, filled with pig's blood mixed with a touch of vinegar to preserve the color. She stirs it gently, then uses a clean fingertip to dab a small dot onto the center of the sheet. Not too much, she says. A little bloom is enough. We're aiming for modesty, not melodrama. You watch as she folds the sheet in half, presses it gently, and opens it again. A faint blot spreads outward like a whisper. Perfect, she says. Believable, respectable, blessed. This is the quiet choreography of generational care. Agata's niece, Marietta, stands beside her, hands trembling only slightly. She is 17, with hair the color of wet straw, and eyes that dart from sheet to door and back again. Her wedding is in 2 days. She hasn't slept in 3. In The Erotic Spirit Through History, Peter Webb details how rural communities across Europe preserved practical rituals like this, not as acts of rebellion or deception, but as survival mechanisms passed from grandmother to granddaughter. The stain was not a lie. It was a shield. Did you do this too? Marietta asks. Agata chuckles. Of course, mine was elderberry juice. Worked like a charm, but the smell nearly gave me away. They both laugh, a little, and then silence. Because underneath the humor lies the same old tension, that a woman's body must prove something it never agreed to prove. And if it doesn't, it must pretend. You sip warm barley tea as Agata flips through her handwritten book of recipes and remedies. One page lists various methods for delicate enhancement of a bridal night. Crushed pomegranate for pigment, powdered walnut shells for soft bruising, rose water to soothe swelling. She hands you a small sachet tied with red thread. For the pillow, she says, smells like lavender and virtue. You ask how many times she's done this. 37 if you count my own, she says with a wink. And does it always work? Her smile fades slightly, only when no one looks too closely. Tonight's authentic story comes from a rural trial record in 1579 in Castile. A young woman named Lydia was returned to her family after her wedding night for failing the blood test. Her mother, determined to save her from disgrace, recreated the sheet with goat's blood and brought it to the husband's parents, claiming the first had been spoiled by nervousness. The family accepted the offering, and the marriage proceeded. Lydia went on to raise 7 children. Her mother, it was said, became something of a local consultant for such matters. Historians still argue whether these rituals represent resistance or complicity. Were these women keeping a toxic myth alive, or using the myth as a disguise to protect one another from it? In the eyes of scholars, the morality remains unclear. But in the eyes of mothers and daughters, clarity was never the goal. Safety was. Here's your fringe tidbit. In parts of the Balkans, a pre-wedding ceremony called the Red Veil Ritual involved an older woman rubbing beet juice on the inside of the bride's knees, a symbolic gesture to invoke the sign of passage. It was seen not only as tradition, but insurance should questions arise later. Marietta now practices on a scrap of hand steadier. She asks if the groom will know. Agata shakes her head. They never know, and the ones who think they do don't deserve to. They pack the stained sheet into a chest alongside the wedding dress, a carved comb, and a silver cross. Marietta hesitates. What if I'm caught? You won't be. But what if he doesn't care about the stain at all? Agata smiles. Then he's better than most. The wind picks up outside, rustling the vines. You help close the shutters and light a candle shaped like a pear, an old symbol of fertility, though no one remembers why. You think about all the women who came here before, who sat at this same table, who dabbed their cloths with the same care, who prayed not for a happy marriage, but for a silent morning after. And somehow, this feels more honest than any courtroom, more sacred than any church. Because here, the test is not whether you're clean or dirty, it's whether you're clever, loved, protected. As you prepare to leave, Agata wraps up a packet of dried herbs and hands it to Marietta. Steep this in milk for the nerves and for your dreams. Marietta hugs her and whispers something only a niece can say to an aunt who has saved her. And as you walk back down the hill, you feel the warmth of the house still clinging to your clothes, the smell of lavender, the soft comfort of a lie meant to do no harm. In this little farmhouse, the story of virginity isn't pure or dirty or sacred. It's just another recipe. And the most important ingredient? Love. Dawn finds you walking again, this time beneath a sky still heavy with mist. You pass through orchards just beginning to bloom, their petals blushing against the cold, and across wooden bridges that creak with memory. You've wandered through courts, bedrooms, alleyways, and farmhouses, but now you approach a place removed from all of it. Quiet, deliberate, watching the world through stone walls and candlelight. You are walking toward the convent. The abbey sits atop a sloping hill, encircled by low walls of moss-covered rock and framed by rows of cypress trees. It is older than it looks and kinder than people say. The nuns here rise before the sun, move in silence, and live not to be noticed, but to notice. And yet this place, this cloistered sanctuary, has held more than prayer and Latin chant. It has held the stories of women who fled the world's most impossible question: why didn't you bleed? At the gate, a nun with deep-set eyes and arms freckled from years in the garden greets you. Her name is Sister Beatrice. She doesn't ask why you've come. She only says, "We're baking today. Come warm your hands." You follow her past the garden plots and into a kitchen where 3 novices knead dough in silence. The scent of anise and dried lemon peel fills the air. And while they bake bread, you begin to understand what else this place bakes: dignity, safety, and the chance to start again. Over a simple breakfast, Sister Beatrice explains that many of the women here did not arrive with vows in their hearts. Some were sent quietly after failed betrothals. Others came because they had nowhere else to go. One, she says, arrived with a blue bruise under her eye and no family name. Her husband sent her back the morning after the wedding, said the sheet was clean. Her body, he decided, was not. She paused. We gave her clean sheets and new work. She now makes our altar cloths. In the history of sexuality, Foucault reminds us that institutions of repression often created unexpected pockets of agency. Convents, though controlled, isolated, rule-bound, could offer women something the rest of the world rarely did: consistency. In the convent, a woman's body stopped being a question. Tonight's authentic story comes from a Carmelite convent in Naples, recorded in a 1604 ledger. A young woman named Cecilia entered after being cast out by her family due to a failed wedding. Her dowry was rescinded. She was on paper unmarriageable. But within the convent walls, she was taught herbal medicine and eventually took over the infirmary. Decades later, her notes on healing fevers were still in use by visiting physicians. The record closes with a sentence scrawled in the margin: God sees not the stain, but the hands that heal. You walk with Sister Beatrice through the cloisters as she tells you about another former resident, Tilda, the beekeeper nun. She didn't speak for the first 3 weeks, just tended the hives. Then one morning, we found her poem tucked into a basket of honeycomb, written in Latin, about bleeding freely for the first time, not for love or shame, but for herself. Sister Beatrice smiles faintly. She's still here, keeps the bees, writes her poems in lemon juice now. Invisible unless warmed. Here's your fringe tidbit. Some convents develop secret rituals of symbolic rebirth for women who arrived after scandal. One rite involved the washing of the name, a ritual bath in warm water steeped with rose petals and ash. During it, the woman would whisper her old name into a cloth, which was then buried in the garden. Afterwards, she'd choose a new name and begin a new chapter. Nothing legal, nothing binding, just permission. Permission to become someone else. You pause beneath an arched hallway where frescoes of saints look down with faces half eroded by time. One of them, Sister Beatrice says, is Saint Dulcina. Never canonized, never confirmed. But according to legend, she was the daughter of a nobleman who refused to consummate her marriage and ran barefoot to a monastery the same night. Her story says nothing of virginity, only that she planted figs, baked bread, and never stopped laughing. In the library, you find a small, bound collection of writing from former residents. Some are hymns, others read like diary entries written in soft Latin. One passage, clearly anonymous, reads, "They asked if I was whole. I told them I had bled from truth, not sin." Another, "I passed the test by failing it, and now I sleep." Sister Beatrice brings you to a narrow garden behind the apothecary where chamomile and rue grow between rows of thyme. Some of our girls only stay a year, she says, just long enough for the gossip to die down. She crouches to pinch off a sprig of sage. We make tea. We help them write letters. We tell them that healing is not a performance. You ask what happens to the ones who never leave. They become like me, she says, still remembering what it felt like to be judged by absence. The sun sets slowly across the chapel windows, casting long gold shadows over the floor. The nuns gather for vespers. You sit at the back, the candles flickering gently. Their chant rises and falls, gentle as breath without urgency. It isn't performative. It isn't for show. It's just sound, a rhythm, a quieting. And perhaps you realize that's what this place offers most, a rhythm outside the beat of judgment, where no one asks what did or didn't happen on a wedding night, where no one lifts the sheet. As you leave the chapel, Sister Beatrice presses something into your hand, a small card painted with a pear tree and the words, "You are not your silence. You are your growing." You walk downhill as night gathers, and as the abbey fades behind you, you understand. Here, virginity is not a verdict, it's just a chapter, and every woman who enters gets to choose how her next one begins. The path tonight leads not into a smoky tavern or beneath the tiled roofs of village courtyards, but into the heart of a palace, one built not just of stone and stained glass, but of myth. Gilded corridors stretch out before you, hushed and echoing, where every tapestry and every step has been choreographed, and at the center of it all waits a woman who made her chastity a country, her unmarried state a statement, and her virginity a legend powerful enough to anchor an empire. You have arrived at the court of Elizabeth Tudor, better known as Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen. But tonight, You won't see the version found in textbooks or stiff portraits. Tonight, you'll walk beside the woman navigating the most delicate balancing act of the Renaissance. A queen who turned the absence of a wedding night into her strongest political weapon. You find her not on the throne, but alone in her solar chamber. It's late evening. The fire crackles low. Her gown is unfastened at the sleeves, the heavy collar resting beside her on a stool. Even without her full regalia, she gleams, like a sword that doesn't need to be drawn to command respect. She is writing a letter, not to a lover, not to a king, but to her privy council, rebuking them again for suggesting she marry. Again, the candle beside her flickers. The quill does not. You listen to her mutter. They measure a woman's worth by the man at her side. I prefer to be measured by my silence. In Sex with Kings, Eleanor Herman captures this uniquely self-fashioned role of Elizabeth's virginity, not merely a personal state, but a public tool. While most queens were expected to marry and produce heirs, Elizabeth crafted a brand from her unmarried status. She allowed herself to be courted endlessly by European princes, dangled potential alliances like bait, and yet always pulled back just before surrender. Her chastity became her armor, her allure, and her control. You wander now through the palace's painted gallery, where portraits of noble suitors, Dudley, Anjou, Eric of Sweden, hang in slightly too grand frames. Each of them tried to win her hand. None succeeded. And each rejection was calculated. A dance, a performance. Here's your authentic story. In 1566, during a tense negotiation with the Scottish regents, Elizabeth was asked again about her refusal to marry. Her response was delivered with perfect courtly composure. I am already bound unto a husband, which is the kingdom of England, a virgin not of fragility, but of singular devotion. It wasn't just political theater, it was a masterclass in narrative control. Historians still argue whether Elizabeth truly remained celibate her entire life. Some believe she maintained chaste intimacy with Robert Dudley, her lifelong favorite. Others suggest her relationship with the Earl of Essex later in life may have crossed lines, but there is no proof, only speculation, and that uncertainty is the point. She made her body a blank manuscript no one else was allowed to annotate. You enter a small antechamber where her gowns are kept. One mannequin stands draped in pearls and cloth of gold, a ceremonial robe she wore to her 1590 dress to Parliament. Woven across the bodice is a pattern of intertwined Tudor roses and virgin lilies, symbols carefully chosen. Each outfit, each piece of jewelry reinforced her mythos. Here's your fringe tidbit. Elizabeth commissioned portraits in which she was rendered almost inhuman. Flawless skin, eyes wide and ageless, her form unchanging year after year. These weren't attempts to look young, but to look eternal. The Virgin Queen was not meant to be a woman, but a symbol, untouched, sovereign, divine. Back in her study, Elizabeth addresses another letter, this one to Mary, Queen of Scots. The tone is diplomatic, but cold. Mary, once her rival in both politics and womanly intrigue, had married multiple times, borne a son, and been entangled in scandal. Elizabeth had none of those things, and yet she sat the stronger. You find a small book beside her desk, a personal copy of Boethius' Consolation of Philosophy, margins scribbled with notations in her own hand. One passage is underlined. In women, chastity is a crown. In queens, it is a scepter. Did she believe it? Maybe. Maybe not. But she understood its utility. And here's a lesser-known story. Elizabeth reportedly wore a locket ring containing miniature portraits of her mother Anne Boleyn and herself, hidden inside the ring's lid. Anne, accused of adultery, executed for it, had been used as a cautionary tale her whole life. Elizabeth, by contrast, would never give them a reason to accuse. She would never risk the sheet, the stain, the whisper. She would not be her mother's daughter in that way. And in doing so, she became something else entirely, a woman whose power could not be traced through bloodlines or bedchambers, but through symbolism, wit, and endurance. You walk now into the garden, where moonlight rests softly on clipped hedges and statues. Elizabeth often walked here alone at night, to think, to escape, perhaps even to mourn the things she could never have. Because power has its price. Maybe she missed the warmth of a shared bed, or the softness of a real touch, or the simple comfort of being asked how she slept. But none of that showed. She was England's Virgin Queen, publicly complete, sovereign, and just out of reach. As the bells chime midnight, you glance back at the tower where her candle still burns, and you realize something simple yet profound. She didn't pass the test. She rewrote it. She made virginity not a gate to be opened or sealed, but a crown to be worn by choice. And no one, not courtier, ambassador, nor historian, has ever taken it from her. The night deepens as you follow the road once more, away from abbeys and thrones and cities of whispers. Tonight the path narrows into a country lane lined with elder trees and low stone walls, worn smooth by centuries of elbows, laughter, and secrets. You pass through a wooden gate where chickens have long since gone to roost, and into a courtyard where candlelight flickers behind small, square windows. You've arrived at a manor house, not grand but not poor either, comfortable, solid. Generations have lived and died within these walls, and though they no longer speak of the past out loud, you can feel its presence in the linen curtains and the iron kettle that's never been replaced. Inside, the air smells of cloves and honeyed milk. In the drawing room, 3 women sit by the hearth, a mother, Marianne, and her 2 daughters, Sabina, 20 and already betrothed, and young Clara, still in the realm of braided hair and berry pies. They welcome you like an old cousin, a guest who needs no explanation. You settle into a cushioned chair. A dog dozes at your feet. Outside, an owl calls once, then silence. Marianne pours warm cider, the spices clinging to the air like ghost stories. She looks at Sabina, who is quiet tonight, her hands folded in her lap. The seamstress delivered your shift this morning, Marianne says gently, and the linen. Sabina nods. She knows what that means. You do too. The wedding sheet, folded white cloth, simple but ceremonial, meant to be displayed the morning after, hung in the window or draped over the back of a chair. A silent announcement, the bride was untouched, and now she is not. Clara, the younger, wriggles closer. But how do they know you bled? She asks with a frankness only childhood can allow. Marianne's smile flickers. They don't, always. Sometimes the sheet tells the truth. Sometimes it tells a version of the truth that keeps everyone safe. Clara doesn't understand. Not fully. But Sabina does. Her face is pale, not with fear, but with the knowledge of what's expected, of her body, her night, her silence. In The History of Sexuality, Michel Foucault describes how rituals of the body become social ceremonies, ways in which entire communities convince themselves that private events can be made legible, measurable. The blood stain becomes not proof of anything real, but a performance, a symbol, a stage prop. Sabina finally speaks. And if there's no blood? Marianne doesn't hesitate. Then we provide it. She reaches for a small basket beneath the tea table. Inside, a jar of goose blood, harvested that morning, still rich and red, a strip of muslin for practice, and a set of old folded sheets with faded patterns from years before. You only need a little, she says. Just a bloom, not a massacre. You sit in quiet awe as she teaches her daughter how to apply the blood with a fingertip. Press the cloth gently and fold it again so the mark settles evenly. Sabina practices once, then again. On the 3rd try, it's nearly perfect. Modest, clean, convincing. It looks real, she whispers. It is real, her mother replies. Because the truth isn't about blood, it's about being believed. Tonight's authentic story comes from a 17th century village record in the region of Auvergne, France. A bride, Isabelle, was sent back to her family after her wedding night failed to produce the expected stain. Her mother, a midwife with experience in village customs, recreated the sheet using sheep's blood and returned it in a cloth bundle. It was laid on the in-law's table with a loaf of bread and a sprig of rosemary, a peace offering. The marriage was reinstated without further comment. Isabel went on to bear 6 children. The sheet, they say, was eventually buried under a fig tree. Here's your fringe tidbit. In some rural parts of Italy and southern Spain, women kept a small vial of animal blood tucked into their wedding trunk, labeled for emergencies. It wasn't considered deceitful. It was preparation, like sewing buttons or packing lavender for the honeymoon. Among some families, it was even gifted with the dowry. Marianne shows Sabina where to tuck the cloth in her gown's inner lining, how to reach for it discreetly after the lights go out, and how to press it against the sheet before dawn. And if he notices? Sabina asks. He won't, Marianne replies. And if he does, he won't admit it. They laugh softly, not with joy, but with the wariness of women who've inherited too many scripts. Clara, still curled at her mother's side, listens closely. Will I have to do this someday? Marianne brushes her hair back from her forehead. I hope not, love. I hope by the time it's your turn, we won't need the jar at all. You sit a while longer, sipping cider. The fire crackles low. Sabina packs the linen carefully into a cedar-lined chest beside her dress and a sprig of myrtle. She places the blood jar next to it, wrapped in wool, like an old secret you carry because you must. And you realize that this ritual, this little act of red on white, isn't about virginity. It never was. It's about survival, reputation, safety. It's about making sure the story can continue without interruption. The mother, the daughter, and the unspoken lesson. Sometimes you must write your own proof. The path is darker now. Not ominous, but hushed, like the last line of a lullaby. You walk slowly, past fences draped with climbing vines and windows glowing with the last embers of evening light. Every step feels quieter than the one before, as if the world itself is winding down. And then you come upon one final house. It's small, tucked into a hill with ivy on the roof and smoke curling from the chimney like a question mark. Inside, no one performs rituals. No one whispers about blood or shame. The linens are clean, not because they need to prove anything, but because someone here enjoys folding them neatly. You step into the room, and there she is, a young woman named Louisa. Her wedding was yesterday. Today there is no sheet on the line, no in-laws peering at cloth with narrowed eyes, no jar hidden beneath the bed, just a fire in the hearth, a tray of tea cooling on the table, and Louisa sitting quietly, watching the light flicker across her fingers. Her new husband, Tomas, is outside feeding chickens. She turns to you with a smile, not wide, not triumphant, just rested. No one asked, she says when you sit beside her. No one asked what happened last night. No one expected anything but joy. She pours you tea, warm and mild. The room smells like mint and bread, and something softer still, like the absence of fear. Louisa tells you how her mother was tested, how her grandmother was tested, how they both whispered stories and stains into her childhood like bedtime rhymes. And then, she says, Tomas told me I didn't owe him a myth. She shows you the quilt they slept under, stitched from old dresses and flour sacks. No blood, no white linen, just color, pattern, memory. In The Erotic Spirit Through History, Peter Webb speaks of the shift that began quietly in the late 1700s. Physicians started to question the consistency of virginity markers. Clerics loosened their grip. Judges hesitated. A slow unraveling, not from revolution, but from reason. Louisa's story belongs to that unraveling. Her family accepted the wedding without questions. Her priest blessed the union without insinuation. Her neighbors brought gifts, bread, olives, lemons, not gossip. Here's your authentic story. In 1792, a physician named Jacques-René Dujardin published a paper arguing that virginity could not be proven by physical examination. He had studied over 200 cases and concluded that the presence or absence of a hymen or any bleeding was no more reliable than the weather. His paper was mocked. But quietly, it changed things. Midwives stopped offering tests. Families stopped demanding them. For some, like Louisa, that shift arrived just in time. Here's your fringe tidbit. In rural Brittany, some communities transitioned from sheet hanging to first kiss toasts. Instead of bloodstains, the couple was asked to share a public kiss at breakfast and then drink cider from a shared cup. No evidence, no examination, just a moment of shared breath. Louisa sips her tea. The fire pops. She tells you she still folded a white linen that morning, out of habit, but not to display, just to place in a drawer where it would stay clean. Historians still argue whether the virginity test truly vanished or simply changed form. Was it defeated or merely diluted? Does modern scrutiny, subtle and coded, still trace its lineage to that old stain? Maybe, maybe not. But in Louisa's house, there is no test, only the gentle creak of floorboards, the scent of rising dough, and the steady beat of her heart unmeasured by anyone but herself. The world hasn't ended. It hasn't erupted in scandal. No one died. Nothing burned. The test has faded, not because someone destroyed it, but because someone stopped asking for it. You step outside into the cool night. Thomas nods at you, wipes flour from his hands, and returns to his chickens. Louisa waves from the window, the candle beside her flickering like a steady breath. And you walk on. No judgment, no proof, just peace. Now take a deep breath. Let it fill your chest slowly, then leave like a tide rolling back to sea. You've wandered a long road tonight, through velvet-lined chambers and soot-dark cottages, through whispered secrets and ritual stains, through myths that shaped empires and little homes that said no more. You've met kings and maids, midwives and queens. You've sat at the edge of old beds while linen told lies for the sake of safety. And now here you are, not in a courtroom, not in a chapel, but in your own room, surrounded by softness and stillness, the world outside quieting. Let that warmth settle into your limbs. Maybe you're curled beneath a blanket right now, or just breathing quietly in the dark. Maybe your eyes are heavy. Maybe they're already closed. Know this, the stories may fade, but your rest is real. Your peace is not something to be tested or proven. You do not need to bleed for anyone's approval. You do not need to pass any test tonight. You are here. You are whole. You are enough. Let your thoughts drift gently like leaves on water. Let the old myths crumble into dream dust. There's nothing else to do now, nowhere else to go, only sleep, only softness, only silence.